Welcome back to Air Crash Chronicles, the channel that dives deep into the world of aviation disasters to honor the victims and shed light on crucial lessons learned.
In the last episode, we investigated one of the most devastating air crash in history, Korean Airlines Flight 007, that led to many innocent lives. For a full chronicle, watch the previous episode, but for those who've already did it, I'll remind you shortly about this crash. On September 1st, 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007, a scheduled flight from New York City to Seoul via Anchorage, Alaska, experienced a tragic incident. While en route from Anchorage to Seoul, the Boeing 747 airliner deviated from its planned route due to a navigational error made by the crew. The aircraft unintentionally entered Soviet-prohibited airspace. Mistaking the unidentified plane for a U.S. spy aircraft, the Soviet Air Forces engaged a Sukhoi Su-15 interceptor, firing warning shots that were possibly unnoticed by the KL pilots. Eventually, the Korean airliner crashed into the Sea of Japan near Monoran Island, west of Sakhalin. The crash claimed the lives of all 269 passengers and crew members, including United States Representative Larry McDonald. The Soviet Union discovered the wreckage beneath the sea approximately 2 weeks later, on September 15th, and recovered the flight recorders in October. However, the Soviet authorities kept this information confidential until after the collapse of the country. So today we're diving deep into the politics behind this crash and the aftermath. Initially, the Soviet government, led by General Secretary Yuri Andropov and advised by Defense Minister Dmitry Ustinov, chose to deny any involvement in the shootdown of Korean Airlines Flight 007. This decision went against the advice of the Foreign Ministry, who advocated for an admission of the mistake. Their reasoning was based on the belief that nobody would find out the truth or be able to prove otherwise. As a result, the TASS news agency released a statement 12 hours after the incident, reporting that an unidentified aircraft had been intercepted by Soviet fighters after violating Soviet airspace over Sakhalin. The aircraft allegedly did not respond to warnings and proceeded towards the Sea of Japan. Some analysts speculate that the mishandling of this situation was partly due to the deteriorating health of Andropov, who was hospitalized in late September or early October 1983 and passed away the following February. In a 2015 interview, Igor Kirillov, a senior Soviet news anchor, revealed that he was initially given a TASS report admitting the mistake on air, but it was replaced with another report contradicting the truth just moments before the broadcast. The U.S. reaction to the shootdown of KAL 007 was one of condemnation and outrage. President Reagan referred to it as a crime against humanity and an act of barbarism. The U.S. government released classified intelligence information to highlight the Soviet Union's actions and gain a propaganda advantage. Secretary of State George P. Shultz held a press conference where he disclosed intercepted Soviet communications and criticized the Soviet Union. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Jeane Kirkpatrick, presented audio tapes of the Soviet pilots' radio conversations and a map of Flight 007's path at the United Nations Security Council. In response to the U.S. presentation, TASS, the Soviet news agency, acknowledged for the first time that the aircraft had been shot down after warnings were ignored. The Soviet Union disputed some of the facts presented by the U.S. and revealed the presence of a U.S. surveillance aircraft, the USAF RC-135, in the area. Overall, the shootdown of KAL 007 further heightened tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union during the Cold War and led to increased scrutiny of Soviet actions. It also played a significant role in shaping public opinion and deepening anti-Soviet sentiment. The transcript of Soviet communications intercepted by the Japanese listening post at Wakkanai was released jointly by Japan and the United States on September 7th. This information was presented to an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. In response, President Reagan issued a national security directive emphasizing the need to hold the Soviets accountable and to maintain international and domestic attention on their actions. The Soviet leadership perceived this move as evidence of the West's hostile intentions. Amidst these developments, a high-level summit between the United States and the Soviet Union was scheduled for September 8, 1983, in Madrid. However, the KAL-007 incident overshadowed the Shultz-Gromyko meeting, which concluded acrimoniously. Secretary of State Shultz expressed dissatisfaction with Foreign Minister Gromyko's response, describing it as unacceptable. As a result, President Reagan ordered the Federal Aviation Administration to revoke Aeroflot Soviet Airlines' license to operate flights to and from the United States on September 15, 1983. Consequently, Aeroflot flights to North America were only accessible through Canadian and Mexican cities, leading to the cancellation of the Soviet foreign minister's planned trip to the United Nations. It wasn't until April 29, 1986, that Aeroflot service to the U.S. was restored. Additionally, an emergency session of the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICO, took place in Montreal, Canada. However, the Soviet Union exercised its veto power on September 12, 1983, blocking a United Nations resolution aimed at condemning their act of shooting down the aircraft. Following the Soviet Union's shooting down of KAL-007, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, responsible for managing the airports in the New York City area, denied landing rights to Soviet aircraft. This action violated the United Nations Charter, which mandated that the host nation grant all member countries access to the UN. TASS and some individuals at the UN raised the possibility of relocating the UN headquarters from the United States in response. Charles Lichtenstein, the acting U.S. permanent representative to the UN, speaking on behalf of Ambassador Kirkpatrick, replied by stating that the U.S. mission to the United Nations would not hinder any such decision and jokingly wished them farewell. However, it was clarified that Lichtenstein's comments were personal and not official. Given the Cold War backdrop marked by Operation Ryan, the Strategic Defense Initiative, the deployment of Pershing II missiles in Europe, and the imminent exercise Able Archer, the Soviet government viewed the incident involving the South Korean airliner as a sign of impending war. The Soviets officially claimed that KL Flight 007 was engaged in a spying mission, having flown deep into Soviet airspace for hundreds of kilometers without responding to signals and disregarding orders from interceptor fighter planes. They alleged that the purpose of the flight was to test the air defenses of sensitive Soviet military sites in the Kamchatka Peninsula and Sakhalin Island. Although the Soviet government expressed regret for the loss of life, they did not issue an apology or respond to demands for compensation. Instead, the Soviet Union blamed the CIA for what they considered a criminal, provocative act. In a comparative analysis of these two tragedies published in 1991, political scientist Robert Entman highlights the differing perspectives presented by the U.S. media. The coverage of KAL-007 emphasized the moral reprehensibility and guilt of the nation responsible, while the focus on Iran Air 655 downplayed notions of guilt and focused instead on the complexities of operating advanced military technology.